Hello and a warm welcome to all the participants and code enthusiasts. We've gathered here for our third innovative workshop aimed at laying the groundwork for the upcoming coding extravaganza, Madhack 3.0. An expedition driven by the love for coding, creativity, and mobile app development. As we gathered here, we find ourselves on the brink of boundless opportunities, prepared to set sail on a journey of exploitation and education. Myself, Tumidu Senaratne, a first-year undergraduate at University of Colombo School of Computing, and I am thrilled to serve as your moderator for this workshop. As we embark on this exciting journey, allow me to outline the key milestones and activities that will shape our experience in the coming weeks. So on the 6th of January, we launched our Madhack 3.0 with the awareness session. And on the 10th of January, we had our first workshop on the valuable insights of UI UX parts of the mobile app designing. On the 4th of February, we eagerly commenced lecturing on Introduction to Flutter. And today, we have joined for our third workshop to explore the fascinating journey of Flutter furthermore. With that being said, please please meet Mr. Rangana Perera, an associate technical lead at Asthenic Private Limited. Having over 5 years of expertise in mobile application development, particularly in Flutter, holding BSc in Applied Sciences from Wamba University of Sri Lanka, Mr. Rangana is a versatile professional who prioritizes continuous learning across diverse technologies, mastering at least one. His proactive and inventive mindset renders him a significant asset in the ever-evolving realm of technology. Mr. Rangana, the platform is yours.
Thank you. All right. So first off, let me share my screen. Yep. Hope everyone can see the screen.
Yes.
Yep. Nice. So let's look at the agenda for today. So we covered some basic understanding of Flutter on the last workshop. And today we are going to speak a little bit more about advanced topics, and we are going to have some coding demonstrations as well. So for the day, it's going to be, we are talking about concurrency, which is a very important part of any programming language, I'd say. And then yet again, state management, because like I said, that's the bread and butter of any mobile application. And we're going to talk more on this and a little bit more on animations as well, since that's a really good part, a way to um, make your app look much more smooth and beautiful. So first off, concurrency. It's not a type of currency. It's just a fancy way of saying let's do things in parallel or let's not block things. And how Flutter manages to do this. So let me first off say that Flutter is a single-threaded language. It does not have any sort of uh, parallel thread, what we call commonly in the industry multi-threading. It's not a multi-threading language at all. So it uses a single thread, the language itself. And yet again, they have an innovative way of handling concurrency, that is parallel programming. But before we talk more about parallel programming in deep, we need to talk about what is the Flutter event loop and what is this synchronous and asynchronous execution. Maybe you have covered some of this in your um, CS lectures, but synchronous and asynchronous, that's the heart of any uh, threads or parallel programming, and a little more about streams. So first off, like, what is the Flutter event loop? So that's how the Flutter engine is rendering things to be able to be visible on your mobile device. So it is, like I said, a single thread, and we call it usually the main thread or the UI thread in other languages. So we don't actually manipulate the thread itself, and in Flutter, we call it an isolate. That's the correct terminology in terms of Flutter. So any Flutter application has a main isolate, and the main isolate will have an event loop. And what the event loop does is it will move like a cycle. If you have any Arduino experience, you might heard of loop, the loop function. It's like a while loop going on continuously, see whether there's something to do, and if there is, it does that. So the event loop is basically the same thing. So the event loop will have repainting, like if color changes or like gesture detection, or if it's like a slide action or state change, anything, it's always going to be happening on the event loop. So Flutter on the framework level, it will add an event to the event loop, and the loop will pick it and do that. So that is the synchronous execution. It goes on synchronously, first in, first out, basically. And in Flutter, the event loop has two different stacks to maintain, actually. So it has a microtask queue, which I won't go in deep to, but it's like a asynchronous event loop, and the event queue. So that is the main one, event queue. And whenever an event loop fires, an action fires, like say, for an example, we want to fetch something from the internet or fetch something from your database, anything, it fires an event, right? So if that event is taking a long time, it will block there waiting, and it won't do anything on the rest of the stack that is being filled down, right? So we should always try to not hold our main thread. That's what I'm basically saying. But in order to do that, we have this asynchronous keyword. The keyword is async. So if you mark anything as async, the event loop, what it will do is, so in any async function, we have a delayed response, and we call that a callback, right? So in any event loop, whenever an asynchronous function is coming up, it will execute it and uh, s- save the callback in a separate stack, and then moves on with the other processes. Not the coding processes, but rather the repainting, the on gestures, the whatever use action that they might do. So that is still being processed. But the actual action that we wanted to perform, the code itself, that is hanging on there until the result comes back. So whenever we do that kind of a thing, it won't block the UI thread and things will work smoothly. If you do that, like if you block the main thread, what you will usually see is something called janks. So jank is basically like a freezing of the app. We call it ANR, app not responding. It just freezes. You can't touch anything. So until that heavy computation is complete, your app won't respond for anything. So that's what we want to avoid. So always try to use asynchronous functions whenever possible, right? And coming back to isolates now. So isolates, that's the Flutter way of things, like I said. And what actually happens is, let's imagine this is the main isolate, and uh, the isolate will have the dart code, and it will have an event loop, it will have a memory, everything is there. And the way the threads work. So thread is basically saying, let's execute something in parallel. I'm gonna split this application code into a separate part. You're gonna execute it while I'm doing something else. And once you're done, just send it back to me, right? So how usually multi-threaded applications work is they share a same memory, and you can access the same memory state with different threads. And if you want to show something, you will need to show that from the main thread. That's how the usual mobile application behaves. But in Flutter, they are not going into threads. They are going into isolates. So in isolate, the memory is not shared, and that is the main difference between an isolate and a thread, right? So if you come from thread background, That is going to be the main thing. You're not sharing the same memory. So you can't just have a global variable and just do something with a thread and use the same variable in your UI code and expect the changes to happen. So what it does is it will when you create a isolate, it will create its own memory and own event loop. So all that said, what I said on the asynchronous and everything, that's going to happen in the isolate as well, the new isolate. um, so what you can do is pass messages back and forth. So um, uh, what are like some of the use cases, like why do we need this? So one of the there's a good article on flutter.dev itself on what usages on isolates are. But usually, when it comes to large JSON processing or big IO operations like database calls, or it can even be network requests or any compressions, conversions of complex data, we usually stick with to a new isolate to handle that instead of blocking the main thread, because the longer something takes, the the much more blockage of your UI thread is going to be. So we want to avoid that as much as possible, and we use an isolate. So one of if I can say, like a practical example I face quite a lot is one of our applications has this dynamic JSON forms in a sense. So basically, the layout must change according to the JSON form that is going to be set by a server or someone else with access to a portal or something. So we get the JSON and we need to we need to create widgets on the fly according how the JSON is. So that's a practical example of a big operation, because we need to pass the JSON, we need to identify what are the widgets and how we're going to place them. So that's a practical example of using an isolate. And then state management again. Yeah, some use cases. I'm going to talk about some use cases on state management, and we'll see these in action on the coding session. So one of the major parts of state management is dependency injection. So depending on the state management package that you use. So I talked about some of them in the previous workshop. So depending on the state management package you use, you can get dependency injection for free. So what is dependency injection in the first place? So basically what it does is, I hope you can read the cartoon here. So it will ask the application, your service, or your controller, wherever you are, you want something. And there's an interface layer saying, okay, I'll get it to you. And what the interface does is it will delegate the builder in a way to build it in a way that you want. So usually we have two major dependency injections. That is, either it's going to be a singleton. That means the memory state will remain the same. You will always get the same object whenever you call it. So it's basically a shared memory state. Or it's going to be a factory. That means whenever you want uh, a, a a service or an object or whatever, it's always going to return a new object. So that is the most common getters of any dependency injection, either a singleton or a factory. So depending on the state management package you use, you might hear this differently. So my personal go-to favorite is either Riverpod or Provider. And in there, what they say is auto dispose or nothing at all. So auto dispose means if you get an object, it will use it, and while on the scope, it will, if you have any listeners active on it, it will reuse the same scope. But the minute you get it off the tree, or the garbage collector handles it, uh, and if you want to request another one, it's going to give you a new one. If it's like a shared state, that's the new argument one. So that's like a singleton. Pretty much we are using that for, I don't know, themes, setting up your app theme, maybe your logged in user status or something. So that's going to be shared within the application. So that's what we call it, the shared state. or it can even be HTTP clients, your API service probably. If you want to reuse the same HTTP client, we can have that as a singleton, right? And the next use case of state management is uh, maintaining active states. So that's what I covered from singletons injections. And the two most important parts of the state management is having the ability to reactive components and reactive operations. So what it basically means is uh, there are in some cases like only certain components that needs to be updated whenever we do something on the application. So that whatever change that we did, we only want it to reflect on a certain element of the entire screen. So we don't want to rebuild the entire screen. We just want to change that specific element. And that is what we call as reactive components. It reacts to a state change and it will isolate itself into a small section. And then reactive operations. So that's like some piece of code that needs to be run if this condition is met. Um, so for an example, let's say you grab like a video or something and you want to save it to your storage. And we can have a listener that whenever the video capturing is complete, it will then reactively operate to the next step, that is saving your video or maybe even compressing your video. So it can be anything reactive to another state. And then finally, this is the most tough part of being a mobile application developer. You need to find a blend of how we are gonna do this state management. So uh, we don't want to over engineer ourselves. So yes, that it's always said that you need to maintain your state in the same way and everything, but sometimes it's just much more convenient and easier to use the widget state, that is the set state option from Flutter itself. So if you can isolate your state changes. So what set state does is, instead of reactively changing a singular component, it will change the entire screen. So that's why we always go for a reactive way. But you can quite easily use set state if your screen is not complex at all. Like, say for an example, you have a pop-up. Like you have a pop-up that's you need to like select some things. Uh, and it's just the selection of like say switches or something. So it's just selections. You need to change the switch on and off state. So instead of having a reactive component there, you can just use set state because it's just a single switch. So you need to find that good blend uh, on whether I'm going to use the state management package for every single thing, or I'm going to limit it to these things, and I'm gonna stick with set state for these stuff. So that's your next goal as a mobile developer. And then finally, we're gonna talk about animations. Uh, so some basic things that you can do on any animation, on any flat application is adding some very small animations. And first one, GIFs, of course, that's like the poor man's animation. So you can just use a GIF as an image, and it is much quite commonly used for loaders and things like that because it's the same animation on repeat. So we can easily use a GIF for that instead of worrying about a lot of code. So for an example, this one, if you try to do this on code, it's going to be thousands of lines, like the curves and everything, the squares and everything, and the flowing animation and everything. It's gonna take a lot of time to do that. But if you can just get this GIF and just paste it on image widget, the end. So uh, that's one cool thing. And also, Flutter has inbuilt animation widgets. So for things like if you search on your material, your widgets, so if you start with animation, you get a lot of widgets after animation. So there's animated switcher, the animated container, animated size, animated colors. So it's just a usage of a different widget. That's it. And then, of course, like I said last time as well, you don't need to reinvent the whole wheel. There are plenty of third-party packages that are good and tried and truly tested. So you can go to these third-party packages and find some good ones. So this one, if you can see like the loading shimmer action. So we can do this in code, but why? There's a perfectly good package available as shimmer. So you can just use that and make your app a little bit more, mm, you know? So uh, that's the next option. And finally, if nothing else works for you, you need to come up with your own animation and usually go with Lottie or Rive in most production applications. It's like a different uh, um, editor itself. So if you have some Flash background or maybe some, I don't know, Premiere or After Effects probably, it's quite easy to use. I've personally used Rive. I haven't used Lottie, but in most cases, the developer is not the one who is going to do this. It's going to be the UI designer or someone on the designing section. And they're going to just do this and give the file back to us. So it's just a matter of usage for the developer. So these are your options. And I'd say try to experiment with everything and find out what suits best for you. And next, yes, let's actually just go for some code. It's There's a lot of I think new stuff that I covered. So let's see. I hope the screen is visible. So for this one, I just have a very small folder structure, some controllers, models, like a MVC pattern. I We can also add any services that we're going to use as like a base and any shared code that needs to be shared within different widgets. So what I'm going to first show you is understanding build and how state management is why we usually use state management in the first place. So I have this really small code saying yeah. So this loader view. Uh, I don't know whether you saw this, but yeah. So we have this very generic loader that's available. This is the Android loading progress indicator, or you can use a iOS progress loading indicator if you want as well. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get this GIF and have it as an asset here, and it's just a matter of image. Right. And then give it a maybe a width of 150. And there you have it, a very nice loading animation. So I of course have a watermark over here, but if you can find a good loading indicator that doesn't have any watermarks, and you can stick it into your background, fine as it is. So in here, the GIF has a black background. So if my background color was to be um, I don't know, blue or something, it's gonna look weird. So that's one drawback of using GIFs. If you can find a good GIF that matches with your color collection, that's all you want in life. And then, yeah, that's basically how you can use something like that to give a little bit of life to your app. And then let's see. So once things are loaded, we are adding things into this list and we're going to show it on using set state. Um, and what I want you to just see is how widgets are being placed. So we have all this in a single class, I'd say. So we have the stateful widget, and the stateful widget comes with two classes though. So it's just a single class. So what happens in this stateful widget, like you have a bunch of widgets saying app bar is going to be this, your column is going to be this, and it's like a widget tree. But what we actually promote is always try to use much more classes. The reason is, so for an example, like you might, if you come from a JS background, you might go to this way of thinking like, okay, I'm gonna have this widget as my function, and it's gonna reduce my lines of code. So it's gonna do this. My loader is gonna be separate and done. But what how the build work is, so this build method, it's going to fire on every single state changes. So if you have any repainting, if your list is added, or if this set state is called, this entire thing is going to be rebuilt, and that means the scaffold, the app bar, the column expanded, this everything is going to be built, right? However, we have a way of so yeah, before that I'm gonna have let's say this icon button maybe. I'm gonna have this as a separate widget. So right. So when I have this one, if I put a breakpoint here and see how it's being built. So when its first frame is drawn, it's being built. Another one. Most probably the first and second are like uh, the Flutter framework itself doing some things. But the third one and fourth one, that was additional. So if I so there's a on press, I add one and set the state. So if I do that, it's gonna again build itself because set state builds everything here. So the add button is rebuilt, right? Same with the delete button. If you want to see, like, if I do this, that's being built. The delete is this clear button, and that's being built again. So what we want instead is not to build these because they don't need to be built. I only want this list to be rebuilt. So what I can do here is have a class instead. So for an example, the delete button, I'm gonna say it's its own stateless widget. And so instead of this widget function returning delete button, I can say it's gonna be a class delete button instead as a widget. And now, if you can see this, like on the IDE, you have this automatic saying use const with the constructor to improve performance. So how does it improve performance? Let's see. So I have another breakpoint here. So that's the first build. Uh, and if you saw that on the context, there was a dirty context. So that's usually happening because it's the first iteration. But if you add things now, and believe me, things are being added, this is not being rebuilt. That is totally because you have this const. So you should always try to use a lot of cons. In order to use cons, you need to break things into widgets, like its own separate class widget. So don't be afraid of having so many classes. Uh, that's a way of life in Flutter, right? Um and then uh, how does having, let's say, class add button now. Now, if I want to have this add button, because I don't want this to be rebuilt as well, right? So if I have this one over here, I can't do this because my state variables, the list and, okay, let's say remove the set state and everything, that's inside over here in this class. So how can I access the add button and do something on press at the same time? So for that, we do something as callbacks, right? So what we can do is say we are going to invoke a function without any arguments, and I'm going to say it's going to be called on pressed. Or you can just go to this and see, okay, there's a void callback as a type. I'm going to just use this the same way. And it's going to come as an argument. Right. So done. So now we can pass this as a function and it's being required. Okay, fine. But now we don't have const anymore. And that's a problem because since if you do the set state over here, that this is not going to do anything. So how can we do this and get the const performance benefit as well? And that's where the proper state management library comes into play. So you need to you need to access the state of this list from somewhere, and you need to be able to access it from this add button as well. And instead of passing things, because if you add a parameter, if you maybe remove this parameter, let's say, uh, like have it like this, now the const is available. And now it's not just const for add button, it's actually const for the entire list as well. So we can get a significant performance increment by reducing the build counts. So by having this, if you want to have it this way, you need to come up with a good state management practice, right? So I'm going to use a river pod because that's my go-to. But believe me, you can do it with anything you want in any state language management platform that you want. So in Riverpod, it's going to be, let's say, something like this. So I'll walk you through the syntaxes. So Riverpod state provider says it's going to be providing a single state. And I can say the state type is going to be a list of items, right? And what's going to be on the first, the initial loading of this. And I'm going to just copy this part, right? So we are getting, so when we try to access this list provider, it will just generate this list of items instead, right? So we can do application logic level instead. Like instead of having a state provider, we can say it's going to be a future provider instead and have it as an API call to get things. So that part is state management specific. So I'm not going to go there. But somehow, let's say you get this list provider now. And instead of manipulating this list of this, I'm going to remove entirely. Everything is going to be removed. So how uh, how the river pod state management, it gives you a couple of things that you can use. So if you want to rebuild a specific component, you can say, I want it as a consumer. And by having this consumer widget, you can mark whatever is within this builder to be rebuilt on whatever thing that you're checking. So I'm gonna watch for this list provider, and if there's any change on this list provider, I'm gonna rebuild and return my widget. So I'm gonna have expanded over here instead. And then let's call this the underscore list now, because list is now the value of this list provider, right? So I can just copy paste this part. Yeah. And then on the same way, like I don't need this add button now. On the add button, so I can just I don't want this to have a consumer, because it's uh, instead of because there's only one widget, and I don't want to waste time, so I can just say the entire class itself is going to be a consumer widget. And in Riverpod, like when you use Riverpod, we need always to need to have a ref, and that's how we get the identity of this list provider. So in this case, it's like a singleton, but if I put auto dispose, it's going to be disposed the second this component is disposed. So on here, I'm going to read this. So, yeah. So I'm going to read the list provider state and access is notified. And I'm going to say to this state, update it by state dot add, right? And I need to return the state here. So what I'm basically doing is I'm having this state management library to give an access to the state of list, and I'm gonna watch for the list changes only on this part, and I'm gonna rebuild that part only when the list state is changed. And from the add button, I get a reference to the same list provider without passing anything, so that I can also get the cost benefit out of it. And then I'm gonna access that state and add something. So I'm gonna like what basically gonna do is doing some changes to the state over here, right? Right. So if you try to run this now and see the builds, so I'm on line number 19 and I'm trying to add things, but it's not being added. Why is that? So if I try to refresh, you can see that it's actually added, but uh, it wasn't over here. So why that is, because if you try to use report, you might say this because it doesn't know that. So uh, how Riverpod works is like if this, it will rebuild on this watch if something has changed, right? But when we use complex structures like this, item and complex classes, we need to do something called uh, overriding the equatables, the equality of it. We need to say that in order to identify this item is separate from another item, we need to have some sort of equality property, right? So, and I'm using this library called equatable to get that done pretty soon. So by having this override, I can say this, if this ID is different, it means two different objects, right? So now if I do this, mm, That's not how it's supposed to work. I'll come back to this. I'm gonna try with a simple state. That's there's something somewhere wrong. So I'm gonna just access this list as string. See if that works. Let's see. And just return. So my start off is gonna be string, and if I do that, it's gonna go to hello. So uh yeah, something wrong with the item. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we'll find out why. Uh yeah. So now let's quickly jump into mm, a different thing. Yeah, so we have the same movies list last time I used. And what I'm going to show you is how to make this a little bit more better. So I have this, where is it? Okay, so I have this, I got this from Dribble somewhere. I don't have access to the Figma, but if you do, like, you get the sizes of this. So I'm going to try to get this part done. Let's see, with the same data that we have. So first off, like, let's say this one, and if I go to my movie tile, you can see it's a list tile. And over here, it's far more bigger than a regular list tile. So if you have used list tile widget before, you will probably know that this is the maximum size is 3 lines. So you can only go for 3 lines, and you can't have the list tile more than that. So in a situation like this, what you usually do is not rely on list tile at all and just build everything by scratch, right? So I'm gonna say, okay, this is what my widget is gonna be. And if I look at it, like, there's a big element at the very left, and then uh, another element over here, which is a column. And on that column, the first line is the title. And I don't think we have tags in this model, but let's say it's a subtitle over here, and maybe the rating, right? So that's like, you need to the last time I said that rows and columns are your go-to widgets at any point. So you need to once you look at a widget, look at a screen design, you need to think, okay, this is how the rows and columns are going to be, right? So I'm just going to copy this image.network now, and that's going to be the first element. And there's a column, and on the column, the first one is going to be the text, that is the title, and that's going to be the subtitle on the second child of the column. And now if I do that, I have expanded errors like overflows and everything. So why that happens is because the row, we need to constrain it somehow. It just imagines there's unlimited space to this side. So we need to say, okay, column, you can only expand until the end of space over here. So it's how the layout is going to work is it's going to draw this image first, and it's gonna get the rest of the space expanded. It means the rest of the space. If you use it on a row, that means the horizontal rest of the space. If you use it on a column, that's the vertical of it. So you're going to use the entire row space. And you can see now things are always center aligned. So on the column, I'm going to say, uh, let's make it a start. And we need some space over here. So, and like I said, guys, try to use as much as const variables as possible. Okay, good enough. And then I think we have, yeah, average. I'm gonna say it has a, yeah, so that's good. And now earlier when I tapped on it, I moved to the detail page, but now that is gone. So what I'm gonna do instead is wrap this in an inkwell. So an inkwell is, in Flutter terms, like if you have this, can you see that there's like a splash animation going behind? And that's what you get from inkwell. So it's ink getting getting an animation. Or you can even use there's another something called gesture detector. Uh, this is much more powerful than the inkwell, but you don't have any uh, like a animation that is built in, right? But you do have the ability to, there's a lot of callbacks that you can get, like any double taps, whether there was force press, so you can do a lot with gesture detectors. But if you want to have the splash animation as well, just go with an inkwell. And I'm gonna navigate to this page. Yep. So that's the list tile redone in a way. And then let's see. So I'm gonna do some small interactions here. So one easy to use animation in Flutter is what we call as the hero widget. So if you add a hero tag on this image network, so what the hero widget does is, so if you like see some sort of an element that is also present in the next screen, you can animate from this screen to the next screen uh, in an easier way. So we call it the hero animation. Uh, what you essentially need is a tag. So I'm gonna just use this test tag for now. I'll show you why it doesn't work. So in this one, this image is somewhere, this one. And what you essentially need for the hero widget, hero animation to work is just wrapping it with a hero and add the unique tag. So now if I try to use this, I get an error. Why is that? What the error says is within each subtree, uh, each hero must have a unique non-null tag, right? So why this doesn't work is in this list, there's multiple widgets, and we are saying since this widget, this movie tile is reused on every single element, it's trying to reuse the same tag for everything. So we want something unique for the tag. So I'm just gonna say, okay, let's use the same URL instead because that's different. And now if I do it, can you see there's like a default animation? And that's it to how have you you can do a small hero widget and just add some more interaction there. You can, of course, create your own way of how the animation is gonna be built. Like, so in this case, it's automatic, so it scales up and scales down and moves with the position. But if you want, you can customize it. You can do some, you can have a placeholder while it transfers and, create its own path. So that's advanced if you want, but this is the bare bones of a hero widget. And then we can even, let's go to something like Shimmer. So these are the packages that I told you about. So it's quite easy for the loading. Instead of a loading indicator, you can just use something like this. I'm gonna just use everything. And there's another package called staggered animation. So that's see if they have a no, they don't. I'll show that. So in most of the cases, when you add packages, you might need to stop your app and restart. Who is and then instead of the center loading indicator, I'm just gonna show this loading shimmer. We didn't even see it. I'm just gonna add a extra delay. Can you see like there's a animation? So this is just a text, but you can just use empty boxes like this and just have a shimmer going on with the same color. And you can have a nice looking loading animation, right? So that's quite easy things to do. And then if I am to show how this staggered animation work, I can think there's something we can copy. So they have, yes, they have a, yeah. So have you seen like the list tiles are being like loaded one after the other instead of just appearing just like that? So that's the basic idea that we want to get. And I'm just gonna copy from this animation limiter. Right. And then my tile is gonna be this. And item count. Yep. Yep. You can see like a small animation. And even for the images, we can do things like that. There's different inbuilt methods you can use. So I'm not gonna go deep than that. What I finally want to show you is how we can use a common service And I have this API client here, which I'm using uh, with DO. That's the HTTP manager. And it's quite easy to use. So we can add many interceptors we want, and we can have any logging if we want. And the interceptor is something like you can add the bearer token for the authorization in one place instead of adding it from everywhere. And we can have a common getter where you can do some filtration here and some cleanups. If the request is canceled, you can cancel the request, and or you can check for any generic errors, any server exceptions, any unauthorized, um, any route unknown or something. So you can simply throw a customized error. And how you are going to use it is, so I'm going to just use uh, with a basic one. So how we're gonna access this API service is, like I said, we need a dependency injection. That's what we need. And I'm gonna simply use the uh, Riverpod way of doing things. So my API client is gonna be a regular provider, and it's gonna provide me the API client. And if I leave this as it is, so this is not disposed now. So if I only add this, my API client, I will always get a new API client. But if I do this, I'm gonna just reuse the same API client, right? And then I'm gonna say, uh, I'm gonna have a new provider called some movies provider, and it's gonna be providing me. We have a provider called state notifier provider. For that to work, uh, this part will just differ according to the state management practice that you use, but uh, yeah, you can just listen on while I drone. And what this state management will do is it will be sending me a list of movies, and my movies provider will be providing me a movies provider. And on the super, so that we need to override that. So this one, we should provide what is the initial state of it. And I'm just gonna say initially it's gonna be the async loading. Oh, endpoint. I'm gonna say it's an async value. So what uh, you're gonna have loading status, you're gonna have error status, or you're gonna have data status. So we can easily use that. And I'm gonna also need a client from somewhere. And the good thing about state management like this is I only need to say, okay, give me the API client from this one. So as long as you have one, it can reuse in any controller that you want. It's just reusing the same client everywhere. So, by using this sort of a practice, it's quite easy to test your application. It's quite easy to manage your application in a good layered architecture. And what I'm going to do is on creating of this object. So I'm going to use the constructor to do this. So whenever the movies provider is initiated, it's going to get the API client. It's going to initially show a loading animation. It's going to initially have the loading state as a state. And it's also going to load this function right after it's being built. So this is a good way to ensure that instead of having, so what we did here was in the init state, we got the data, but instead of doing something like this, we can say this is a better practice because when the object is initialized, it will automatically load it anyways, right? So here I'm going to use a try catch. Get. To provide types. S- It's gonna use slash movie, I think, and yeah, movie. It's gonna pass this and return it. So this is an asynchronous method now. So since I mark this as an async function, my UI thread won't be blocked afterwards. I will only await for this, like this is my callback. So I will await for this response. And once that callback comes from the event loop, it will just go back to here and redo the next steps, right? So I'm gonna use when I get through this, that means my work is complete. So I'm gonna say, okay, you have good data. But if there's an error, I'm gonna say, okay, you have async error instead, and we have the option to provide error and stack trace. So I'm gonna just use this, and yep, that's my controller side done. So now I don't need this, nor this, nor this, and I'm gonna say I'm gonna make this a consumer stateful widget. That's my way of getting things in Riverpod. So this one is the refresh button. So what I'm gonna do instead here is ref dot refresh my provider. And by refreshing, this entire code will be rerun, like this part will rerun. And that means it's going back to loading and loading this method itself. So it's quite easy to use when we are using providers. Think you can use invalidate. Yeah. And then over here, I have the expanded widget. So I'm just going to use consumer because I only want to build that part. So What's also nice about this part is since I said that my state is going to be, I need to also give this. Um, yeah, okay. So my state says it's an async value. So the beauty of river pod is you can say, okay, then if it's a async one, you're going to have three states for sure. And oh no. And if you have data, you're going to show the list. If you have an error, uh, let's say for now, you're going to show a text instead. And if it's loading, you're going to show the loading shimmer. And then your D is going to be the movies. So no need of any extra logic. And then on refresh, same thing. Yeah, that's complete then. So now we have successfully taken your your logic code from your UI layer to your control layers. So your architecture is now much more easier to maintain, and you don't create HTTP clients all over the place. It's just a uh, single source of truth in a sense. Yeah. So now if we try this, of course, there we go. So quite easy to maintain. And if I try to forcefully send a error, let's try to, I don't know, do something like this. I get an error instead. So this sort of errors, you can either handle it on the widget itself, or you can just use another service to get the error. So just like API client, you can have an error service instead, and you can get the error service as an injection over here and just use that to add that to the error stack. And by having a single source of error handling, you can just use that to show the error pop-up. So, yep, I think that covers up what I wanted to show at least. But yep, there's another one you can, I guess, view on your own time. That's another good Flutter slidable. That's something you can use your gestures, slide gestures to your tiles, your list of tiles. So in this case, like you can wrap your this particular tile and have a slide gesture, either left or right, to add some more actions to this. So that's another good way of having this third-party plugin to better your app. Uh, yes, I think I have covered somewhat of what I wanted to show on you this session. So if there's any questions.
Please feel free to unmute your microphones and ask any questions with any hesitation. Okay. Because I received some question from the participants through the online QA form
Mm-hmm.
given, and one question was, I want to integrate a free map API for my location tracking app. How would that work?
Mm-hmm. Free maps. So free ones are really tough to come by. I think we have so this Google Maps, you always need a API key, but I think there's this. Is it Flutter Map? Yes, you can use Flutter Map. It's a OpenStreetMap, and this is free. But it's not the Google Map version of it. It's a different map provider, but that's the only thing I can think of having as a free map, if that's what you need. Yep. I hope that answered the question. But if you, I mean, the best way to solve this is obviously Google Maps, but it's like you said, it's paid. So yeah.
Uh,
Any other questions?
Sir, there's another question. Uh,
Hmm?
there is another question. Uh, what strategies do you use for handling different API responses?
Yes. So in the API service that I showed you, uh, what we usually go with the status code. So we need to have a good rapport with the backend developers. They need to send proper status codes. We usually depend on that. And we also send something called in the error payload and error code, because at the end of the day, we need to readable text so that the user won't get confused. So in the error payload that I got from when I did the change, you must have seen like I don't know, 20 odd lines. So that's not really user friendly. So what we usually do is get an error code as well along with the response. So we use that error code to identify and say, okay, this is your error, actual error. And if it's something totally unusual, you can handle it. But we of course always send logs. That's like one of the first steps that you do in any production apps. You start off with logging as much as logs as possible. But we can't like save personal data, any personal identifiers. But if it's only error logs and um, like navigational data, that's totally fine. So what we usually do that like on an unknown error kind of a thing, that's what we usually do. We go through the logs and see what sort of a background that error had during the time frame, and we try to identify that error. So like I said, it's a matter of dealing with everyone. You need to have a good rapport with your backend developers to say, please send me the error code as well. Otherwise, I can't translate that into a very good user response. But yes, I hope that answered your question.
Thank you for imparting your invaluable insights and expertise with us. Your passion, dedication, and mastery of your craft shone brightly throughout the session.